Have you ever thought about how science fiction, these stories about worlds that don't even exist, could actually help us understand and maybe even heal from trauma in our own world? Well, today we're going to dive into the incredible work of author River Solomon, who does exactly that. They build these amazing fictional worlds that get right to the heart of some of our deepest real-world wounds. And it all starts with an idea so powerful, it'll totally change how you think about history.
Just let that sink in for a second. An entire people born from one of the most horrific atrocities in human history, the Middle Passage. And get this isn't just some shocking line to grab your attention. It's the very foundation for a whole new mythology. It's a story that takes this immense trauma and asks a radical question. What kind of new life could possibly come from this?
So yeah, that incredible, haunting idea, that is the absolute heart of River Solomon's award-winning novella, The Deep. It's going to be our first stop as we explore how fiction can completely reshape our understanding of history, of memory, and really what it even means to be human.
All right, so let's meet the people who were born from this history. They're called the Wajinu, and they are literally a new species, born from this deep physical interaction, this entanglement between the unborn children and the ocean itself.
So what are the Wajinru? Well, they're this incredible hybrid of human and fish, with black skin and scales. They live in the deepest parts of the ocean, they breathe water, and they don't talk like we do. They communicate using electricity. They're what you might call a post-human species created from the violent clash between the slave trade and the natural world.
And this, right here, is where we get to the core of the story. Because for the Wajirnru, history isn't something you just read in a book or hear stories about. No, it's something real, something physical, a burden that someone literally has to carry inside their own body.
Okay, so meet the historian. There's only one. And this person has this massive, unbelievably painful job to hold all 600 years of their people's memories. All the trauma from the Middle Passage, the wars, the loss, all of it is stored inside their body. Now, this frees everyone else to live their lives without that crushing weight, but you can imagine, it nearly destroys the person who has to hold it all.
And this is such a wild idea, right? It shows us that memory is discursive material, which is just a fancy way of saying it's not just a thought, it's a physical thing. It's literally coded into their cartilage, their organs. After a historian dies, the history can be harvested from their body and passed to the next one. It also means if that body is ever lost, so is their entire history forever.
So these incredible concepts aren't just coming out of thin air. Solomon's work taps into some really big, fascinating academic ideas. So let's just take a quick detour and look at the frameworks that help us unpack what's really going on here.
First up, there's Afrofuturism. This is all about looking at history, especially traumatic history, and using the tools of science fiction to imagine totally new futures. And this is so important because it doesn't just dwell on the trauma. It actively builds new worlds and new possibilities for Black identity and survival, completely outside of historical limitations.
Then you've got posthumanism. Basically, this way of thinking just throws out all our neat little boxes. It says there's no real line between human and non-human, or between our minds and our bodies. For groups of people who've been historically dehumanized, this is a really radical way to reclaim power, because it dissolves the very categories that were used to oppress them in the first place.
And finally, we have this big one, Ethico-onto-epistem-ology. I know, it's a mouthful, but all it really means is that our ethics, what we think is right, our being, what we think is real, and our knowledge, what we know, are all completely tangled up together. You can't separate them. For the Wajinru, knowing their history physically changes who they are and what they feel they have to do about it. Okay, so we've seen how these theories work in the deep ocean. But these aren't just ideas for underwater worlds. What happens when these same powerful themes of trauma being stored in the body and transformation, what happens when they come up to the surface? Well, that question leads us right to our next story.
So now, let's turn to another one of River Solomon's novels, Sorrowland. This is where we see how these themes change and grow. Here the trauma isn't coming from the deep past of the ocean, but from the violent history of the American land itself and from a really oppressive community. Our main character here is Vern, and she is dealing with a lot, facing prejudice from all kinds of different angles. The story kicks off with her escaping this controlling religious compound, and then she gives birth to twins, all alone in the middle of the woods. So Vern's out there, in the woods, and then something wild starts to happen to her body.
A fungus gets into her system, but it's not like a disease, it's more like a partner. She starts growing a protective exoskeleton, she develops these almost supernatural abilities. She's literally becoming a human-nature hybrid, merging with the forest around her.
And this is where things get really, really interesting. Vern starts experiencing these hauntings, right? But they aren't ghosts in the way we usually think of them. They are the traumatic memories of the dead, people who were victims of terrible violence, and their memories have been absorbed into the land, into the soil itself. And now, through this fungus in her own body, she can tap into them. Once again, history is a physical, living thing.
So what in the world does all this mean? How do these bizarre, fantastical changes actually lead to any kind of healing? Okay, let's tie this all together. Because both of these novels, in their own way, are arguing that healing doesn't come from being separate. It comes from connection, from entanglement.
So, when you put these two novels side by side, you start to see this really cool pattern. In the Deep, the world is the ocean. In Sorrowland, it's the forest. Yetsu, the historian, carries this collective history inside her, while Vern taps into memories stored in the land itself. But in both stories, the key to understanding and ultimately healing is a deep, physical connection with the non-human world.
This quote about Vern and the fungus, it just says everything, doesn't it? The thing that's changing her isn't some hostile invader. It becomes family. It's this deep, symbiotic relationship that in the end is what makes her powerful. She's not just trying to survive in nature, she has become one with it.
And this really is the biggest takeaway from all of this. Both stories are saying that healing from deep trauma isn't about just forgetting and moving on. It's about sharing that burden, like the Wachenru finally learned to do. It's about finding strength in your community. And maybe most radical of all, it's about embracing our connection to the world all around us and questioning the whole idea of what it means to be just human.
So, we'll end on this thought. Solomon's work really pushes us to think about how our histories, our traumas, even our moments of joy, aren't just in our heads. They're in our bodies, they're in our communities, and they're in the very ground beneath our feet. And that really leaves us with a big question. If all that's true, what stories are living inside of you? And what connections might be the key to your own healing?